This is Authentic Talks, where we ask the hard questions and challenge the status quo in cybersecurity and identity. We bring you real conversations with leaders who believe authenticity is the key to trust and transformation.
Welcome back to Authentic Talks, the podcast where we are actually talking about identity, security, and in real conversation. Today, my guest is known as the White Wolf, as we say in French, le loup blanc. His name is Simon Moffatt. Simon, for those who didn't have the chance to actually meet you, is it possible for you to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Well, hi. Well, great to be here. I always love to be talking about identity and security and all of that stuff. So obviously thrilled to be chatting today. And I guess I've had 25, just totting this up recently, over 25 years in the identity and access management world, which is a quarter of a century. It's a long, long time. A lot
So
of things
should
have
we say
changed.
that? Normally we don't say the age, but
It's a long time, which in some respects in the world has changed hugely since 2000, 2001. Technology's changed massively, but I think also the sort of the competitive landscape has changed and how we use technology has changed. And I feel quite privileged, I guess, to have stayed within identity and cybersecurity for that length of time to observe technological change, how we use things. A lot of things have clearly become obsolete, and a lot of that time was spent working in the software world, working for vendors, making solutions and trying to make the world a better place. And for the last 5 or 6 years working as an analyst and an advisor, trying to track a lot of the emerging technologies and writing research and trying to enable the next generation, I suppose, of practitioners and consultants.
That's a great cue for me, because we had a very busy month, and there were two shows. One was RSA in San Francisco. You get the chance to attend there, and the second was ISC West, where HID came, and I'd like us to have to unpack a little bit what we heard there. What are the things that are really resonating to the people that are listening to us? But before we start, we have a tradition on this podcast, and it's called the Authentic Question. What was the most overhyped buzzword or message that you heard at RSA?
Oh wow! Well, look, let's start off with AI. 5 or 6 years ago, all vendors were talking about things like zero trust and things of that ilk. That's been replaced without a shadow of a doubt. Maybe last year a little bit, but definitely this year, every vendor was securing AI. Now, that's a really bold claim because AI, first of all, is big. It's broad, lots of moving parts to it. Not all AI is the same. There's lots of different aspects to that, and there's a lot of generic messaging around. We secure AI. We make it safe, and often lacking a bit of detail and specificity around which parts of the AI world are you securing, how are you securing it, and so on. So AI was everywhere, unfortunately. And I think that the ironic thing, just to add there, really is there are some really, really interesting vendors and approaches really adding real value, and they often get a little bit blurred by the fact that everybody is claiming they do something in that space. So hopefully in a year or two that might die down a little bit.
It's definitely a big topic, and I think I'd like us to go back to it and explore it, especially when we look at authentication, on how to secure AI agents, on the orchestration of those AI agents, the necessity of a runtime identity, etc. Was there any other things that was prominent there? So you've talked about zero trust, like taking a little bit the back seat. Still there though, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Was there any other trends that you've seen many about trust, about new technology, such as what we're talking about now because of the change of the attacks with quantum cryptography or trust? What's your take on that?
Oh, absolutely right. I think, I guess a couple of things, the industry, if you like, or the buy side community who are building systems and running banks and manufacturing plants and whatever they're doing, they have a huge legacy, if you like, of technology, business process, customers, clients. They have a whole back history to deal with. So it's all very well and good talking about AI and the next thing that's coming along. And many organizations are starting on this journey, but still many are trying to roll out strong authentication, zero trustifying their networks. You're moving perhaps from on-premises to cloud, engaging with SaaS, all the things which I guess we as technology experts think are not cool anymore, or perhaps have been fixed and been done, and let's move on to the next thing. But just on the zero trust angle, there was some really interesting talks were just about things like zero trust maturity and pragmatic approaches to things like data encryption and all these problems, inverted commas, that we've sort of fixed, if you like. The solution is there, but equally it takes a number of years for industry to catch up, whether it's through funding, process maturity, having to change how their systems operate, maybe waiting for some systems to become obsolete, for example. So a lot of the things which we think are fixed generally take 5, 6, 8 years to really catch up. So it's actually quite nice to see. There's 1 or 2 talks on things like zero trust, maturity. Data security has had a bit of a renaissance, I think, along with authorization as well. These things are being, I guess, put into the spotlight due to AI. How do you identify? How do you encrypt data? How do you, do the whole sort of secure access to data, which I think is often overlooked and assumed to be correct. So it's all very good talk about the cool stuff, which is invariably gets the headlines, but there are still a lot of problems, I think, in identity and cyber, which we're still trying to solve, and we're slowly but surely getting there, I think.
Yeah, so what you're saying is that, yeah, AI is taking the lead, and it's the shiny new kids on the block, and it is definitely a new something that will help us maybe fast track strong authentication, strong security, but still there are a lot of problems that are still not resolved, and it takes a lot of time for any new technology to actually be adopted by an organization because of the legacy and etc. And sorry to paraphrase you. This is interesting because this is something that I've done some research prior to this call and this conversation. And this is something that FIDO Alliance, when we look at passkey, this is something that we're really looking into right now as a way to provide strong authentication for banks, for financial institutions, for enterprises. And what they're saying is that there is a gap between the adoption and the deployment and the actual deployment. So I'm trying to find the source. How would you qualify that? Why do you think there is a gap, and what is the blocker for you, according to you?
Specifically with passwordless, you mean, and passkeys?
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
there's a couple of things to consider here, I think. And in general, technology is rarely the blocker, if you like, when it comes to security. We're often quite good and quite rapid at solving technical problems. Technical innovation is actually quite cheap these days, and AI is a contributor to this. And by that I mean it's quite easy to solve a problem and automate a problem and vibe code or whatever, technically build your way out of a solution, out of a problem quite quickly. Now, passkeys is interesting because that requires a multitude of different stakeholders, different people involved, often changes in process or changes in application. So suddenly you've gone from something like passwords, which really have been around 50, 60 years, really. Since the dawn of computing, we've had this concept of a PIN or a passcode. So that's sort of embedded in our sort of culture of technology, if you like. Absolutely terrible from a security point of view, absolutely terrible really from a user experience perspective, but it's still there. So you have to ask the question, why is that the case? And there's a few things to unpick. I think the first one is it's free. Now, I'll say that with a tongue in cheek, it's free at the point of usage. If you're a developer, it doesn't really cost you a great deal in time or effort or knowledge, because all of your coding libraries support password-based authentication or PIN-based authentication of some sort. So it's the learning of it and the implementation of it is free. Now, the cost, of course, comes much later around data breaches, or perhaps the huge cost of help desk password reset calls when you've been on holiday for 2 weeks, or you've been to the RSA conference, you come back, you forget your password, you have to speak to the help desk. So there's a whole host of delayed cost and delayed end user experience, and the sort of security risks involved there as well. So the cost is quite a long tail. So there's a cost aspect, there's a cultural end user awareness aspect. All applications are different as well. So to roll out something new or modern like passkeys, you have to be able to integrate and roll that out, not just to one or two core applications, but to the legacy mainframe, databases, web apps, your SaaS apps, your mobile telephone stuff as well. So end users and application owners, they want to have that consistency, and there's an operational cost there as well about having that consistency. So I guess that there's a perfect storm really to making that a reality. And there's a few things I like to sort of compare it to. One is things like smoking in the UK. So the UK, we have a smoking ban in the UK now. You can't smoke in restaurants and pubs and things. And that's been in force, I don't know, 10, 12 years or something, quite a long time. But obviously when that was introduced, it was such a huge milestone, if you like, but it still takes the cultural aspect quite a while for that to catch up. And things like wearing seatbelts in cars, these things, there's a legal aspect to it, there's a compliance aspect, there's an end user aspect. So there's multiple facets, I guess, is what I'm trying to say to things like passwordless and passkeys.
And I understand where you're coming from, saying that like authentication in general is and yet the adoption is we're talking long term. We're talking a time that is long versus technology, which is short term, something that is fixed very easily. And at the same time, where I see some problematics is that because of the technology, the attacks are sharper, are quicker, they're making more damage. And so this is, for me, if I'm putting myself in the skin of a person responsible for the security of my organization, how do I bring together those two timelines of, okay, I have something that is super long that requires a complete transformation, and something that actually requires an acute solution now, because otherwise everything else will fall apart.
I think that's absolutely fair. I think there's two things to unpick, I think. One is you need to understand, I guess, where you are today. So that's the sort of current profile of your organization. And that's looking at where your identities are, what they do, the authentication factors. Where's identity helping in hindering the business ultimately? So you're sort of doing that audit, pain point assessment, that understanding where you are. Clearly, the second part of that is the sort of trajectory to the future, that target profile. Where do you want to get to as an organization? It could be passwordless, it could be supporting agents, it could be whatever that looks like. So you start off with where you are, and obviously you want to design that future roadmap state. And take passwordless as an easy example there. So your current state is you may have a mismatch of multi-factor authentication, you may have passwords, you may have PIN, you may have some systems that just use passwords on their own, for example. So you understand the risk involved there, and clearly your strategic target is to, within 3 years, remove all passwords and shared secrets across your networks. It's quite a big strategic goal, and I think you have to work in both tactical and strategic narratives. So there may well be some systems that you just never even get MFA integrated for. It's too complicated, the risk is low, poor usability, lack of integration. So there's going to be some things which you essentially allow to become obsolete, and there's going to be some tactical things you may have to do. You may introduce, I don't know, the sort of legacy SMS one-time password or something hideous like this, for example, but maybe that works for that particular system or that particular group of users. And strategically over time, you have that vision. But I think it's really, really important to have that vision and stick to, we are going to passwordless, or we are going to passkeys, or we are going to biometrics. And over time, it becomes really difficult to implement against that. So what I mean by this is any new application that comes along, or any system, it's then an exception. Why are you not rolling out passkeys? Why are you not rolling out biometrics, or whatever it can be? And it's that suddenly becomes the minority, and every net new system is then on this new world. So important to understand that there are going to be tactical losses, if you like, but it's really important to have that strategic direction. And I see many organizations, unfortunately, they don't have that strategic vision. So all of those tactical decisions end up being quite short term. So this system logs in with MFA, and that system doesn't. Another system has a custom authorization solution. It ends up being very fragmented ultimately. Now, that fragmentation is okay if you have a strategy in place, and if you don't, it can become a real problem.
It's a very nice segue into a topic that both you and I we've discussed many times, which is continuous identity or converged identity. And this is interesting because at ISC West, the theme was convergence. And one of the things that one of the keynote was referring is that, and I'm just going to quote, it's not the perimeter that fail, it's trust. And identity is the one attack surface every adversary has to pass through. And that was a physical security show. And so we are seeing this convergence, even the physical security people. You were talking about strategy, you were talking about tactical versus vision. It feels to me and to us that there is a movement that is emerging right now where those two worlds that used to be very, very siloed and separated are starting to actually look in the same direction and looking at the same North Star. Is it something that you, talking at RSA, meeting with people, you also experienced?
Absolutely. And I think the really powerful thing as to why that is more strategic than just another, I don't know, sort of buzz or something which is cool or different, is it links to the business. Now, identity in cyber in general it's often been quite detached. It's I used to be the LDAP guy 25 years ago, or the security guy. Nobody cared what you did really, because it was often seen as just the tech people doing some tech stuff in the corner. It was often quite detached from what the organization was trying to achieve. Now, the reason why this more continuous and converged angle is developing and has real cadence, I think, is really, it's much more tied in with what the business is seeing. And the business now is in this hugely dynamic and continuous world. Let's use that again, because the business is having to face competitive pressures, geopolitical pressures, compliance changes, balkanization of trade and how we trade and deal with things. So the whole business landscape is very, very dynamic and basically lacking information. You don't necessarily know how your products will go to market, or how you will be able to deliver a service, or how you'll be able to understand competitive pressures. There's lots of disruption ultimately. So the business has to be more dynamic, agile, responsive, continuous. And ultimately, you don't want your identity in security landscape to be fragile, fragmented, static, and unable to meet the business where the business is, which is trying to sell things, build things, share things, keep staff happy, keep staff engaged and productive. So ultimately, the business is facing continual pressures, and they have to be adaptive and agile to those pressures. And I think that's why we're starting to see this convergence of the identity layer, more continuous look at things like risk and how identity is supporting the business. And I think that's organizations who get that right, they see real transformation, I think, in how they operate.
That's very clear. And I think one of the things that to make it even more complex is that, and I think you coined that expression, we have a three-body problem right now. It's not anymore just human and devices, or human and devices that we need to secure. It's human, non-human, and agentic AI, and some of them have their autonomous, let's say, will, or they are operating, and that's in a sense, is a main hurdle. And I think this is also something that we that our organization, they need to take into consideration in the way they are structuring uh, their identity landscape. When do you think this became a three-body problem, and which of the three is the mode out of control now?
Oh wow, well that's a really good one. I think there's some really nice things have emerged though. I think go back 10 years, identity was it was staff and employee centric. It was often sort of infrastructure focused, very reactive, isolated, siloed. It was a cost center within the business essentially. And now move forward to sort of 2026, and identity has sort of gone from being at the bottom to being in the middle, and in the middle of in the center as well. Not just, it's the center of everything. It's center of productivity for staff. It's the productivity for partners and supply chain. Clearly, it's foundational for security. Clearly, it's helping B2C and customer and citizen engagement. So there's a whole change in what identity can try and achieve. And I think historically, we're very much so focused on the B2E world that we became a little bit myopic, I think, in some of those problemscapes. And I think the introduction of machines and the more latterly workloads, NHI, whatever, agentic, this last sort of 2 years, I think it's really amplified that actually, we have some real expertise in handling identity problems. So authentication, authorization, just-in-time access, all of these, I guess, separable or concepts which you can make generic, and you can apply those concepts to different identity types. I think we're now starting to understand, actually, do you know what? Maybe it's not the same way of authenticating an agent that it is to a customer or a member of staff, but the concept of having strong authentication is very, very much applicable. Just-in-time access, being able to verify an agent. Those concepts can be transposed across different identity types. Not necessarily the same approach or even the same technology and tooling, but the same concepts. I think that has suddenly become, I think that's the light bulb moment, which I think has happened this past sort of 2 or 3 years, when you're trying to secure agents, and actually when you sort of boil it down, you think, actually, yeah, these are all identity and access management style problems. I think that's quite refreshing.
And so if I want to explore a little bit more this agentic AI, autonomous agents running into your systems, taking actions on your behalf, sometimes without you knowing. I think you wrote about it, and you wrote about the different laws of identity, especially for human or non-human. And you were mentioning that it needs to resolve this. You need to have an accountable carbon person attached to it, regardless of that. Can you explain a little bit more your thought around this, and how can you implement that within an organization? What does it look like to implement that into an organization?
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. It's number 3, I think, from memory on the laws thing. And the whole point of that was, it was all about discussion, really, and all getting people to understand and think, how should we treat this new world, essentially. And I think there was, I think it was IBM back in the early 70s. They had an advert, and it was something like, the machine cannot be accountable, or something along those sorts of lines. And the idea being, you can't blame a machine. Really, if a machine goes wrong, who are you going to blame? The machine doesn't care, right? So ultimately, a very similar concept with agents. Now, it's a very different world, I think, between obviously the 1970s and today. And absolutely, we have these autonomous or semi-autonomous agents maybe acting on our behalf or acting on a team's behalf. You're not quite sure what the intent or what the capability may well be of the agent. So we have to have some guardrails there, of course. But I think linking back to the carbon life form, it does 2 things. One, it introduces a level of accountability and traceability of the actions there, but it also ties it into the life cycle management side of things. Now, we talk a lot about life cycle management of human identity. We don't often get it right. I still see organizations struggling with the onboarding, verification, offboarding sort of routine, if you like, of B2C and B2E identity. But ultimately, if you have that working effectively, you can then in turn link agents into that life cycle. So if I leave an organization, all of the NHIs and agents and all the things I've touched and built and leveraged, for example, they should also be part of that life cycle. May not necessarily deleted or disabled, but maybe they transfer across to you because you work in my team and whatever, we work in the same area. So it's all about having that level of accountability, I think, which becomes really, really quite important. And that then allows you to have a good governance model around why these agents were created, who created them, what are they doing, and then you can start working on just-in-time access and authorization and all of the other stuff. But it's all about strong foundations, I think. And how you go about doing that? Well, clearly, one way is looking at behaviors and usage. What's the agent doing? Essentially, what systems is the agent accessing? What's it doing within those systems, within those sort of data-centric worlds? How can that be correlated to human behaviors, teams, departments, boring stuff like role-based access control? And you're sort of trying to find and link in that way. But I think it is vitally important. I think having them so ephemeral and so rapid, they have to have some sort of a root of trust, if you like, to coin a term that already exists, to have that root of trust to a human. And that makes things a bit easier to manage, I think.
I'm just going to repackage because you've said a lot of things there, and just to make sure that we all get it. So one of the things that would work is to basically apply the well-known term of industry, joiner, mover, lever approach to AI agents or autonomous agents. So that's one part. The second part is ensuring that we have the foundation ready, whether it is from a governance point of view, but also the runtime part, the just-in-time access. And again, if I want to bring that back to the conversation and to help the people that are listening to us, what should they start doing now in this quarter, assuming that there are a vision to enable that and to address this particular topic? I know you've been working and talking about security into data runtime. If I have that as an organization, how does it look like? And what does it look like when I have both, or when I just have one part of it? And what should I do?
Yeah, you asked me a lot of questions there in return. There's a lot to unpick. I think it's difficult because the agent thing it's often termed as the sort of worst of both worlds, and by this I mean it's the worst of worlds because of scaling, and by that there are loads of agents, lots of non-human identities in that respect as well. So you have a scaling problem and an ephemerality problem where they come, they disappear, you're not quite sure what they've done. That's quite a big non-functional requirement to try and have to deal with. But equally, you also have this behavioral action-based problem as well, in the sense of agents are not deterministic, which really means you don't really know what they're going to do. So if you're talking about traditional machine-to-machine communications where you have API talking to an API, you sort of know the type of payload. It may be a JSON payload. You sort of know how the endpoints will authenticate. You sort of know the time of day this thing will operate. Maybe it runs 24/7, but you sort of know the payload. You know the sort of what's going to be in the payload, how big it looks like, how many times those APIs talk to each other. It's pretty static in some respects. It's like a bus going from two towns. You sort of know the timetable. You know how it operates. The agentic aspect is much more probabilistic and much more based on goals and objects, and it's not necessarily task related. So the objective of the agent is going to require optimization, which means it's going to change its behavior, and it may well change the access it needs. It may change the payloads, it may change the systems it needs to gain access to, the data it gains access to. And the problem being, some of that could be legitimate, some of that could be it's learning and it's becoming more aware and it's doing things in a more optimized way, and it may well need to have access to these systems in order to fulfill its objective. Now that becomes really complicated because you don't quite know whether it's malicious, whether it's an accidental issue, whether it's purely legitimate and doing exactly what it should be doing. So there's a huge host of behavioral problems there. So you have a scale problem, a behavior problem, and then ultimately, because we're linking to a human, we still haven't fixed all of the human related problems in our identity world as well. So, we talk about strong authentication, passkeys. Well, that isn't 100% rolled out in every organization. We talk about the join and mover leaver process for the last 30 years. Well, we still have ghost accounts, we still have orphaned accounts, we have excess permissions, we have shared accounts, and so on. So we have all of this human baggage, if you like, and identity data risk. And then you sort of multiplying that by this new fangled agentic world, which has all of this unpredictability, and it's a bit of a cascading problem, I think. So without being too scary for the audience and the listeners, I think the first thing is just to understand what your landscape looks like. What do you have? What does your human identity world look like? Authentication, authorization, repositories, and so on. What does that agentic world look like? Where does the risk really exist? And I think once you've gone through that exercise, which may take a couple of months in honesty, you can then start to devise that strategic strategy and start to put in place controls which can try and reduce that risk. But it's the first part, you need to understand what you have really, and that's a really, it sounds boring, it sounds like it's not very cool, we need to go and buy some technology, and you may well have technology that can help you do that, but it's really important to know what you have and where your risk is.
Yeah, I think what you're saying here is technology will always be there. Technology will always innovate, and you don't have to jump on every trend or any shiny tool that comes out of your way. And for you to be resilient, you have to think about, you have to do your groundwork first, establish that. And as you said, and just rephrasing what we've said, defining the vision afterwards. There is one topic that I'd like to double click on here because I think it's an interesting one and we haven't talked about it enough, which is the human problem. And that's something that also was raised during ISC West, where we recognize that we're living in a fast, automatic, emotional world all day. And that's actually this categorization of this human world is what phishing exploits on a regular day. And at the same, and that's where the risk is. And we haven't found a way through that.
Yeah, I absolutely, I do not disagree. I was actually at RSA last week, and I was speaking to an ITDR behavioral monitoring sort of company. They were telling me they'd done some research around a phishing campaign where the threat actor essentially had crafted an email like they do, but the attacker knew that the email was going to be parsed and managed by an agent. So they knew the human had given up on their inbox and given up on their emails because there were too many. So they essentially delegated authority to an agent to sort of manage and handle their emails. And the bad guys knew this, and they essentially crafted an email, a phishing email, but within that email, it actually contained prompts and other manipulative ways of essentially manipulating the agent that was going to receive this email. Long story short, to do credential theft. So it was just yet another iteration as to how credentials can be stolen by a phished site and by a phishing campaign, and that will continue. But I think you mentioned quite an interesting word there, which is emotive. Humans are driven by emotions. They are driven by incentives as well. You know, we operate via incentives, be that in the workforce, be that you know what we're tasked with doing within our workforce, but also as customers and as consumers, you know, how we interact with services and how we engage with products and things online. And you know, the bad guys know this, and they have that asymmetric advantage, and they will play to our emotive strengths, and that's that introduces some really subtle, awkward psychological attacks, which the bad guys use around phishing and around, you know, making website look authentic, or perhaps there's another one, just actually another anecdotal story. There's another phishing campaign I saw, which the email that got sent was intentionally had some spelling mistakes. So I can't remember the name of the bank, but the bank had some the logo and stuff was just so obviously a fake email. Now, the bottom of the email says something like, if you suspect this email to be phishing, click on this link to report to our help desk. Now, clearly that link was not the company help desk. That link went to the bad guy. So all of that psychological emotive funneling,
Wow.
and you think, oh, right, well, I can spot this as a bad email. I'm going to click and report this. That essentially vectored off to whatever, a fake
Yeah,
help desk. So it's subtle. It's very subtle, very powerful.
it is alarming actually at the same point, because it's really about um, how do you enforce. Actually, trust shouldn't be enforced. It should
Mm.
exist as is, and the question here is, how do you ensure trust and trust in your services? How do you deploy it? And whatever tools you have, especially on this emotional topic that you just um, discussed about, we realize that this is the hardest part, and this is basically the vision. The vision is the trust. How do you enable it? How do you make sure? And sometimes it's to simplify what you have. Sometimes trust is about simplicity. It's about less but better than thousands of systems that are running in parallel that are creating distraction. And so, with that in mind, I want to be a little bit cheeky here and ask you to put your visionary hat on. And I know you wrote your book about what the IAM would be in 2035. What will it be according to you? What like, if you were to have your you remember those bowls, where you shake them and it gives you it gives you it gives you you ask a question and it gives you an answer, like, those bowls. If you born in the 80s, you know what I'm talking about, right? So if you were shaking your bowl, what would it say? And if the question was, I am 2035,
Oh,
what it would say?
it's a difficult one. I think, look, predictions are always tricky. I think the idea really of the book was not to try and be too prescriptive and say, these technologies are going to win and these will die and everything else. But more about how to think about the future. And there's lots of predictions still out there around, SAML is going to die and the password's going to die and whatever. AI is going to do all these amazing things and make lots of things obsolete. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But I think the real concept around identity in cyber really is to try and just have a framework of how to think about the problem space. Where's identity helping and hindering the business? How do we measure success? How can we evaluate emerging technologies? How can we evaluate our own needs? You mentioned trust there. Trust is an incredibly difficult thing to do in the physical world. How do you trust a person? How do you trust a service or a government or any of these things, really? So that there's lots of complexity there, psychological complexity. And I think trying to then sort of apply that to the digital space is very, very difficult. And AI is moving so rapidly. Even in 12 months, the innovation, the value, how we use it is changing. So if that continues for the next decade, my predictions are probably absolutely horrendous. So I think it's all about how we think about the problem space, how we understand the problems more than the solutions, I think. And it's often a real big issue. Even at RSA recently, it's all about the solution. But okay, what's the real problem we're trying to fix? And I think if you can do that to a level of accuracy, I think the solutions normally sort of write themselves, I think. That was a
Okay, so
cop-out
if I
answer, really,
want,
wasn't it?
no, but if your answer, so then you took your bowl, you shaked it, and say, what will IAM be? It's how would be the answer from your
It is.
bowl.
I will give some concrete things though. So the end of the book, ultimately, I think there's two things I think will still exist in 10 years' time, hopefully. One is the identity, and one is data. Now, those two things I don't see changing. Now, I use identity in a quite a loose term there, because I don't necessarily think it'll just be about people. Clearly, we now have workloads, we have non-human, we have agents. We'll probably have some sort of hybrid or augmented identity perhaps in the next 4 or 5 years anyway, operating on our behalf. So we have some sort of identity or an entity, and ultimately the end of that goal or that information flow is a piece of data. Now, it could be a member of staff trying to get access to whatever, a recipe for the famous cookie that they make. It could be a customer trying to get access to a Netflix film or whatever it can be at the end of that chain. But there's an identity, a piece of data, and in the middle, there's some sort of access path, information flow that requires authentication, authorization, validation, attribution, which is a word I'm very keen upon actually. But another buzzword I love is attribution, which was quite prevalent at RSA, and also the intent of the identity. What is the identity actually doing? So not what you want it to do or you think it's doing. Look at the empirical evidence and say, what is this identity actually doing? So I think those two pillars will definitely be there in 10 years' time. The bit in the middle, whether it's cloud, hybrid, on-prem, AI-led, would be very variable. But I think those two principles will be the same.
And just to make sure that we get it right, what attribution and intention. So attribution is who is behind the identity, and intent is for what purpose we have this identity. Is it a fair representation of you two concepts?
I think that's fair, yeah. So the attribution, absolutely right. It's trying to work out, what's the actual biometric who, if it's a physical carbon life form, but equally applying that same concept in a digital setting. So if it is an agent or an NHI, how far left can we attribute this, right the way down to a process, to a root of trust, maybe linking it to a carbon life form. But you have that real left shifting of the attribution. It's not just a weird credential or an identifier that you don't really know what it does or where it's come from. And absolutely right, the intention, you're really looking at evidence and behaviors and actions. What is this entity actually doing within the system? And is it known? Is it unknown? Is it suspicious? Is it comparable to some sort of threat actor or internal malicious behavior there? So it's those two things I think are really, really important. And they are difficult things to do. They're not simple things to achieve.
So we wait until 2035 and we will see.
Hopefully get there before then.
We're coming towards the end of our podcast. But before you leave, there are a couple of things that we usually enjoy doing, and one thing is what we call the lightning round, and this is a series of short questions. The theme for this time is RSA because you enjoyed it, and so without thinking, without first instinct, can you tell me at RSA one session that made you cringe or that gave you hope?
Oh wow! Well, I don't want to do a cringe one because I think it's difficult to present or do a session anyway. So there's one or two which, let's say, have less interest for myself. There was some good hope ones though. I think there's some interesting ones around how we understand sort of threat intelligence and how we really look at sharing that intel and looking at building a real body of knowledge around trying to, back to the intention aspect, trying to not pick out unknowns and trying to handle that better. So there's some interesting talks there for me on that.
Was there an identity problem that nobody on stage wanted to say out loud?
But back to what we said at the beginning, I think there's a lot of human identity problems we haven't solved yet, and they may not be sexy, but they need to be solved. Identity data cleanup is one. Orphan accounts, access permissions, get that sorted.
One thing that CISO keep funding and they should kill this quarter.
Oh wow! I think AI is definitely making some things more obsolete than others. Things like vulnerability management, exposure management stuff seems to be an automatable problem these days. I think the vibe coding thing there's some benefits and some risks involved there, but yeah, some of that stuff is really altering how CISOs think about security, I think.
The last one is the best thing you ate in San Francisco that week.
Oh goodness me! I had some nice beer actually. I quite like my craft ale, so I had a couple of nice craft hazy local Drake's hazy IPAs. Food was a blur. It was either meetings, parties, so the food was average, but
okay,
some of the coffee
nice beer.
And some of the beer was some of the nice beer, nice coffee. I think was probably sticks in my brain.
Did you go to Identity Beer?
I didn't, unfortunately. It was a lunchtime session this year outside in the park. Unfortunately, I was yet in more briefings inside the media suite at the Moscone Centre, so I was lacking on a bit of sunshine for a couple of days while I did that. But I heard it was a good event.
I think this is a perfect way to land here with the conversation around beer at RSA. And First, thank you, Simon, for this conversation. This was very, very insightful. A couple of things that I carry from this is we have 3 problems: scale problem, behavior problem, and human problem. Technology is cheap and easy to solve, but vision is something that needs to come first. Is there one thing that you want our listeners to actually do differently after this conversation that we had? Is there one last piece of advice that you want them to think about or do differently after listening to this podcast?
Yeah, I think that was a really great summary, I think, for sure. I guess just think about identity more strategically than it used to be. I think historically it was this infrastructure, it was a technical thing that you just, the Active Directory or the LDAP thing in the corner, which nobody cared about. But I think really now to consider it as a more strategic enabler for productivity, for security, for revenue, it really is the fulcrum point. So first of all, just consider it in that landscape, which introduces different stakeholders, and then just understand where you are with identity. Where does it help? Where does it hinder? How does it help your staff? How does it help customers? How does it help partners? What works? What doesn't work? And just really sort of sit down, if you like, and involve different parts of the organization to have that type of understanding. And I think from there, you'll understand your problem space better, the risk, what works, what doesn't work, and then you can build a more strategic plan. But for sure, it's rarely a technical, go and buy a technical product. Just understand what works.
And I think if they want some insight, they can definitely connect with you and CyberHut, and you provide this advice. We are planning for the next episodes of Authentic Talks. Who do you think we should invite next?
Oh, wow. There's a lot of identity people. I think it's always good, though, to bring in people from a different perspective. And by that, I mean, my previous comment about identity being more of a central function within the business, to have people who aren't necessarily the identity experts talk about identity. So how does the digital teams or the marketing teams or the data teams or the security teams, how do they see and think about identity? I think that is much more of a powerful conversation, really, because you start to see where identity really is and what it's not doing or how it's perceived. I think that's probably my call. I do like to go to the conferences and events where it isn't just identity. I think that's quite a powerful thing to do.
That's a very very interesting one. Thank you very much, Simon, for this conversation. This was very insightful. I really enjoyed our time. Definitely want to taste the beers in San Francisco. For the people who are listening to us, if this is resonating with you and this podcast resonates with you, please share it. You can find us on all podcast platforms. And please subscribe so we know that we are doing the right thing and saying the right thing. Simon, thank you very much again. And for this conversation, and for everyone else, stay authentic. Until next time.
You've been listening to Authentic Talks. Ready to rethink what you know? Follow us on LinkedIn and join the conversation. Until next time, stay ahead, stay authentic.